Good morning and welcome to the Indiana Uplands Housing Series. We're very excited to have you this morning. We are really excited about our presentation. Our presenters this morning will be Tina Peterson and Mayor Denny and Jane Hendrickson. I'd like to introduce our first speaker this morning, Tina Peterson, who is the President and CEO of Regional Opportunity Initiative. We'll be talking to you about the housing study. Thank you. Thank you, Tina.
Thank you, Lisa. First, I want to thank Lisa and our team for preparing us for today's event. And for those of you who haven't met Lisa, welcome her to the ROI team. I want to welcome you to the first session of ROI's Regional Housing Webinar Series. We're here today for a couple of reasons. We're here because, number one, this region very willingly embarked upon an analysis of housing as part of a larger strategy for prosperity that we're working together to address in our region. Because of that willingness to engage, we were able to create an incredibly rich, a rich and detailed analysis of housing in our region. And because a group of individuals, one representing each county, agreed to serve on a housing technical committee, we are here because they have helped us think through what next steps would be most helpful in activating the strategies that were identified in the plan. We're here because this information, of course, now that we have it, would be useless if it isn't used to help inform and support decision makers, cities, counties, governments, developers, contractors, builders, nonprofits, investors, and community stakeholders think about how we address housing in this region. We're also here because our housing summit that was scheduled in April was canceled, like so many other things in the last number of months. And so what was our housing summit has become a 6-session series, webinar series that we are so grateful you're taking part in. And finally, we're here because thankfully many of you registered to attend today, and we're interested in hearing what we had to say about housing in the Indiana Uplands. And it's a region that continues to pursue every opportunity for success and prosperity that possibly comes our way. Today, I'm going to offer you a really fast look at a very large document. The Indiana Uplands Housing Study was completed last year. It is a 300-plus monster of a document that really includes everything, a chapter on every county in the Indiana Uplands region, and talks about housing needs and opportunities in each of those counties. It also includes a regional analysis as well as a section just on solutions and best practices that we might look at as a region. You know, the question, of course, perhaps is why did we begin with a housing study? Why was this an important component of what we were trying to accomplish in our region alongside many other initiatives? And of course, the answer is that we can't think about prosperity without thinking about housing. Prosperity, of course, for us means supporting opportunities with our key employers in the region. And when we think about workforce attraction, retaining populations in our region, it always has to do with housing. And of course, housing is also how individuals and families begin to grow wealth. The focus of this analysis was really on what we call workforce housing. And it's important to note that workforce housing is not the same as just affordable or low income housing. Those, of course, are part of the equation. But workforce housing is really about housing that is available at every entry and exit point in a person's career, so to speak, for every stage of life, from entry level, from new families through retirement. It's about the full life cycle. So this study focused not just on one income level or stage of life, but on all of them. We all know that housing has been a barrier and can continue to be a barrier in our region. And the reason we embarked upon the study was, though, while we all acknowledge this, we really couldn't quantify the need. We didn't fully understand the barriers. And without doing so, it's so difficult to determine solutions. So we did hire RDG Consulting, which really is a group that, one of the few that we could find actually that had ever done a housing study on a region this large, 4,000 square miles. Many had done a neighborhood or a city, maybe a county, but few had done an 11 county region. But RGG brought real strength in that area. The data that they developed really begins to tell us a story about housing in our region. We began by really looking at what's happened relative to population in the Indiana Uplands. And the picture tells us that since 1990, we have seen growth in population in the region, especially between 1990 and 2010. This region grew substantially from 340,000 people to almost 400,000 people. Since that time, from 2010 to 2017, growth has been a little bit slower, with some of our counties declining in population, but as a whole, the region growing. What we will learn, of course, is that housing growth has not really kept up with population growth in our region. When we look at, of course, at labor force and unemployment rates, it's hard to think about it today, but really pre-pandemic, this region was at full employment, right? We had burgeoning industry sectors growing rather rapidly. We were desperate, continue in many of our sectors to be desperate for employment, to attract employees. And so we have been, we have really, even now during the pandemic, we, other than in one instance in Orange County, which is now trending in a more positive direction, we have always outperformed the state relative to unemployment. And really, our occupational needs assessment that we conduct each year really talks a lot about talent demands in the Uplands region. Jobs in our key sectors, advanced manufacturing, life sciences, and defense, have grown substantially in the last number of years, by 14% in fact. We see all of our key sectors adding jobs, and just our most recent occupational needs assessment told us significant growth across all three sectors. Defense sector, 4,000 jobs by 2026, and really no indication that's going to be impacted by pandemic. In Bloomington, Catalent, in the pharmaceutical space, life sciences space, is desperately trying to hire 600 employees to fill contracts they have to produce COVID vaccines. Really, we see growing sector demand in our region. And we know that growing sectors require a growing workforce, and growing workforce requires housing. And so that it was with that lens that we began to look at what housing opportunities need to be in our region. One of the first challenges we know we have in the region is around rental properties. And this particular map gives you a good perspective on it. All the blue is owner-occupied housing. All of the rusty orange, red, whatever it looks like on your screen, is renter-occupied. And you can see rentals are sparse across our region. Rental rates tend to be low in this region, which makes it hard to develop new rental properties and attract rental development, but yet is something that we truly need to attract workforce in our region. When we look at median home values in our region, there's a great deal of variety, right? There's a wide range. The median home value in Crawford County is $86,700. The median home value in Brown County is $174,800, and in Monroe County, the median home value is about $186,000. We know that some of the low housing values in our region are a reflection of the conditions and maintenance of some of those properties. We also know that low housing values in some of our communities are stagnating new construction. When we look at this map, it's very interesting to see the green areas, those with the higher median home values, also are our larger employment areas. It's interesting to see, however, two of our employment areas, Lawrence County and Martin, really don't have as much diversity in housing options in terms of value. And that, of course, could present a challenge in trying to maintain, for instance, in Martin County, a county with some of the highest paying jobs in our region, really lacks some of the housing variety that would be important for that population of workforce. We think a lot about value to income ratio in our region, and this is a colorful map, but it begins to tell a story as well. The areas that are the light orange and the light yellow, those are areas where housing is undervalued or very undervalued. What we're really looking for are those areas that are the lighter green color. That's where we have very affordable housing options. When you go beyond that into darker green, into red and orange colors, you begin to see unaffordable or very unaffordable areas. Our goal here, of course, is to be in that range around 2.5, and that really is where we find we are most affordable. Looking at this particular chart, you can look at that far right side at the value to income ratio. This is really looking at household income range as compared to units that are affordable for that house, for that household, so to speak. And you're looking for that value to income ratio about 2.5, right, across a variety of different housing stocks. So 2 to 3 is the ideal range, with 2.5 being the goal. You can see we have several counties in our region that are severely undervalued. We have a couple that are very unaffordable. We have one that sits directly in the middle as ideal, and that is Du Bois County. It is something we need to address. As we begin looking at these very broad maps and issues around housing value and type, we thought it might be helpful to get a little bit more perspective on this by looking at some specific counties and how that data plays out. I do want to say at this point that we're just barely touching on the amount of data that's available for each county. And I encourage you to take a look at the housing study. And I know we're going to put a link on a chat for you throughout this webinar. It will really tell you a great deal more about each of our counties and our region relative to housing. But looking at Du Bois County specifically, as we said, the housing affordability in Du Bois County, regardless really of your income, is very affordable. Value to income ratio averages 2.5. Looking at both Huntingburg and Jasper, slightly different, but as a whole, really coming in where we'd like to. In terms of owner-occupied versus rental, Du Bois County is doing better than most of our communities. They have about 77% owner-occupied, 23% rental. Their rental properties aren't incredibly old. Median age is younger than in many of our communities, and the vacancy rate is has remained very steady, which tends to be a sign of a healthy housing market. If you look at this, you can begin to see a lot of affordable housing, that light green area, which is our goal. You don't see a lot that falls into the unaffordable category. The higher median home value in this region compared to the rest, and that is about 146,000 median here on the higher end. It is creating some challenge for those that are having to compete for property and homes, and causing some folks to stay in rental properties longer than they might desire. When we think about what needs to happen in Du Bois County to meet housing demand, we begin to look at a series of numbers, right? What is the population we expect at the end of by 2030 is what we're looking at. Using a 1% growth rate for this county, we really know that we need about 47,000 units by the end of the period. Backing into what then we need to construct to meet the goal of housing for a population of that size, we need about 195 units constructed annually. Breaking that down a little bit further, we can begin to look at where we need that within various rental rates or property values. And so on the owner-occupied side, we know in Du Bois County, our greatest need is really in the moderate market to the high market. So housing of $130,000 or more. And you're going to hear some from Denny and Jane in a bit about what they're doing in this particular price range. We know in the rental category, we really need properties that are below $700 a month in rent. What the housing study really recommended is to think about what the challenges relative to some of these housing categories are meaning for this community relative to commuting. 7,000 people a day commute from elsewhere into Du Bois County to work. They're paying their taxes somewhere else. What would it mean if we had more properties in this particular community? More rentals at market rate would attract more young that's a tough word today, I guess, professionals. Market rate rentals would also incent current landlords to enhance some of their existing properties. And more lot development is really needing to take place. In this community, cities are taking a really active role. As part of this analysis, we really want to take a look at what recruiting would be in each of these counties based on what we've learned about housing. So if you're thinking about trying to attract a young professional, for instance, into Du Bois County, they're looking for a job. They're looking for housing to support that, right? They have income of $57,000 perhaps. That's the average in this community. They can afford a mortgage of about $244,000. Looking at multiple listing service for this particular community, it shows right now that there are 16 active houses on the market right now. That is in one of our largest employment centers in the region, one of the top 3 for population. Right now, a real shortage of houses. Transitioning a bit to Orange County. So you can see we're going from south to middle to the north side of the region. In Orange County, the median home value is about $90,400. Their value to income ratio is 2.11, so on that lower end of acceptable, 2 to 3. So hovering a bit, moving towards undervaluation. Their lower home values in this particular community are really creating challenges for finding comparables for financing new housing and development in this region, as well as encouraging rehab of some of the homes they have that really are potentially dilapidated. You can see there really are large swaths of yellow and orange are undervalued in this property with some areas of great affordability. When we look at the demand for housing in this region between now and 2030, we know that we are going to need annual construction of about 45 units per year. That is using a growth rate of 0.38. We know right now that there's a surplus of rentals on the market in this community for those making $25,000 to $50,000. Beyond that, there's an incredible shortage for those making $50,000 to $75,000 in household income. The low number of rentals in this particular county means that higher income households are really competing for the same units. So in Orange County, we really need to focus on moderate to high market rate housing. So housing, once again, over $130,000. We need rentals at every sort of rental rate from low to market rate. While we're seeing demand slowly increasing for housing in Orange County, we have work to do in meeting that demand. There are some recent projects that are creative, and I hope we'll talk more about them in our series. One is one that's being incented by employer, who guaranteed to a contractor and developer that any unfilled units would be backstopped by their employer for up to 3 years. Interestingly, that never came to be, because as soon as they began building and marketing these units, they filled immediately and they had a waiting list. So they now have 40 units filled and are preparing to build more. If we're thinking about recruiting somebody to Orange County, we're thinking about a single professional perhaps. They have a household income of about $43,000. They need rent on the high end, right, of $1,070 a month. That includes their utilities. When we took a look at rent.com and even talked to some of our partners in Orange County, what we learned is that they could identify no properties that would serve this particular population in Orange County. In fact, when we did a search on rent.com, it told us that to find a property in this price range, that you would need to go to Bedford, Salem, Washington, Mitchell, or Jasper for housing. Moving on to Monroe County, so the northern end of the region. Of course, the largest community in our region relative to population. So this is a community that sees about 16,000 in commuters every day, so 8,000 commuting out, once again, like other counties, creating opportunity for others in terms of housing. For this one, as you can see, there are pockets of unaffordability really in the center of the county, which is where Bloomington sits. There's really a ring then of affordability and undervalued properties around the city and the county. Incomes, what we learn from here, that while there's lower median income due to students, incomes and values are really significantly out of alignment in this particular county. Sales prices are high, yet they are not attracting additional developments. One of the interesting things to look out in Monroe County, you can't think about Monroe County without thinking about the student population. So how do we compare to other university towns in the Midwest? Looking at this, Monroe County has the most unaffordable housing when you look at value to income ratio, as compared to Muncie, where Ball State is, to Purdue Community, to Terre Haute, and then also to Champaign, Illinois. If you look at median contract rent, and then the percent paying more than 30% in gross rent, we are once again not a distinction we want, but the highest in both categories. When we look at Monroe County using a growth rate of 1%, looks like we need 5,000 additional housing units between now and 2030, or construction of 466 units per month. We have a really extreme shortage of housing priced between 100 and 150K. While that housing stock exists in Monroe County, it's really purchased by investors as student housing, leaving it unavailable for entry-level housing for young professionals that really need that price range. Looking specifically at housing development in our community, we know that where we, like in other counties, struggled the most, although we need housing in all categories, is for housing of 130,000 or more. In fact, hovering close to 2,000 units needed in the next by 2030 in this particular category. And then we need affordable rentals in Monroe County. These are rentals that are likely going to take some sort of subsidization or nonprofit development. Over the next 10 years in Monroe County, there's a deep need to balance the variety and pricing of housing, and that's going to have to happen through some risk sharing, some streamlining of the development process, which is really holding down development in Monroe County. We're going to have to think about sites along older community corridors and go beyond student housing. When we look at trying to recruit a new single professional in Monroe County, They're likely to have household income around $45,000, $50,000 a year. Maximum rent they could pay is $1,100-ish a year. When we look to see what's on the market, 46 properties total, 21 that are non-student when we're looking at rentals. We know that we have somewhere 25,000 plus registered rentals in this community, and right now there are 46 rental properties with rent below $1,100. What we begin to see by looking at these counties, and the same when we look at others in our region, is that we have real opportunity in the region. We need housing, we have growing employers, we have communities that are really focusing on quality of place, but we do need 14,000 roughly plus units by 2030 to meet what we anticipate is demand for housing. We need a mix of owner-occupied and rentals, a mix of single-family and multifamily. And you can see that we really need that housing in every one of our communities. Certainly the amount of housing varies, and you see the higher numbers in those communities where we have what we think of as our employment centers, but there is no community that does not need to be focusing on housing development, and there is no community that does not have significant opportunity. If you really dig into the housing study, you'll begin to see a number of recommendations. And while it might vary community by community what the solutions are and the opportunities are, there are some things we find in common, that we really need to elevate the quality of existing housing, that we need to overcome our undervaluations, and that's going to happen through some housing variety and some sharing of risk. We need lot development, including infill lots. We need to create some below market housing, especially in rentals, and that's going to take rental programming. We have too many people in our region that are rent burdened. We have to address housing quality programs and some degree of code and code enforcement, and of course this can look this can be done in a variety of ways. We need to invest in quality of life features as well, and I think that is something we as a region have really been focused on. We know that every community has creative quality of life and workforce attraction plan, and that every county in the region is pursuing projects. In fact, ROI is looking at grant applications right now to fund quality of place projects. The study really identified city and county challenges that need to be met. And over the next couple of months, we're going to have sessions in this series focusing on each of those, focusing on solutions that really offer promise in our particular region. We'll be looking at medium density and infill housing in September, as well as multifamily housing beginning in October. Looking at the Center for Rural Engagement's Housing Ready Toolkit, which has a wealth of tools that communities can use and would be incredibly invaluable, especially to some of our city, county government entities. We're going to talk about financing for housing development, and finally housing quality on October 28th. We'll have some additional bonus sessions, including one that will occur at the ROI annual report to the region on October 13th, also a Zoom meeting. I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to do a really fast run through of what we've learned about housing in the region. I think what will really bring some of this to bear is hearing from our next two speakers. And so it's with really great pleasure that I want to introduce two people to you. First of all, Denny Spinner probably doesn't need an introduction. I think he is so well known across the region and has inspired others to think about the possibilities in their own communities. He was elected the mayor of Huntingburg in 2011, is serving his third term in office. He was chair of Huntingburg Stellar Committee, which really earned the Stellar Community designation in 2014. And he's the past president of the executive board for Accelerate Indiana Municipalities, or AIM. He's an ISU guy. has a bachelor's degree in career and technical education, and also an associate's degree from Vincennes in broadcast production technology. I'd love to have that chat sometimes, Denny. He and his wife, Sherry, have 3 children. He has been working so closely over the years with Jane Hendrickson, and she is the principal of Boxer Girl LLC. She has over 20 years experience in single family and multifamily home development. She's worked with every aspect of residential land development, including operations, management, financials, budgeting, and training. Before starting her own development company, Jane was the VP of Development and Property for Davis Homes, the Director of Operations for Buckingham Companies, and the Chief Operating Officer for Denny Companies. That's spelled differently than your name, right, Denny? She teaches construction management at Purdue. And when she has, I don't know if she has any time, any downtime, but when she does, and this is really important, right? It'll help you understand something. She enjoys playing with her boxer. Her boxer's name is Brandy, but her previous boxer, Abby, was really the inspiration for the name for her company. And so it is with great pleasure that I invite these 2 folks to visit with us and to really begin by talking a little bit about why housing is such a critical issue and why it was such a focus for Denny when he took office as mayor a number of years ago. So Denny, Jane.
Thank you, Tina, for that introduction. I'm very flattered, and I can tell you, in 2011, when I came into office, I didn't know anything about anything we're talking about today. So it was a fast learning curve. But what became pretty obvious about the possibility of why housing was critical in Huntingburg was, the fact that we were a regional employment center. Du Bois County's unemployment rate was amongst the lowest in the state, probably the lowest in the state, almost month by month, with Hamilton County being the other. And while that sounds like a great deal, it was also a great challenge, because at 1.2%, 2.1% unemployment, we needed workers in Du Bois County. And when we were listening to our employers, the biggest need was places for the people to live to gain that employment. From Huntingburg in particular, Huntingburg was a very strong community when I came into office, but we were a little stagnant. We hadn't had any kind of major housing development in Huntingburg for over a decade. So we had 2 kind of challenges in front of us, and those were things that were pretty apparent from the outside. But the challenge of meeting that, creating an environment where housing could happen, was we needed the data to really develop that idea and to bring people like Jane into the conversation. And that's why the housing study that Tina just went over is so important, because you've got to have real information to allow people to make that type of investment. We in Du Bois County, through Du Bois Strong, did a housing study in Du Bois County, and we had a document that I could walk in and talk about that said, this is the real thing. We all had these ideas of what we should do, but the data that we have at our hands right now with this document that Tina just talked about is gold. It's the foundation for which we have. Tina asked, as we were preparing for this, what were the barriers and the notions that we had to change as it comes to housing in Du Bois County. And again, my approach to a lot of these things is I know what I don't know, and I didn't know what that was. And through the Stellar process, we identified the need for workforce housing in a variety of areas. We needed single family homes in an affordable price range. We needed apartments. We needed housing for those 55 and older. So we kind of put together a plan on how to do that. But when it came to single family housing, I didn't know where to go with this. Through a mutual friend, I think he might be even on the webinar today, through a gentleman that was working on our Stellar committee, Ed Curtin. We started looking at ideas of how to do this, and Ed said, "Well, I know this lady up in Indianapolis that can maybe make it, would be interested." And through a one-day introduction with Jane, she came to Huntingburg to kind of look around, and it was either the smartest move I ever made or the craziest. It was after about 4 or 5 hours together, Jane and I shook hands and said, we're in. We got a problem here that we think we can solve. I didn't know what the barriers were. I had an idea, but having someone like Jane who was willing to commit, had the data in her hands that said this is a possibility in this community, she helped me identify what those barriers were and get us to a path that got to the housing development that we now have in Huntingburg. So Jane was my source of information, a great partner that allowed me to identify the issues that we faced as a community that were the barriers for her to coming in and developing property in Huntingburg. So Jane was kind of my book of knowledge that I relied on to help me identify those issues. And I mean, Jane can kind of speak to that, you know, as she came in the door and looked at Huntingburg, she knew there was possibility, but she also knew there were things we had to address. So Jane, I mean, what was your view, I guess, when we met for that first time on 4th Street?
Well, Denny, it was a great day. Thank you very much for allowing me to be part of this panel with you. Yes, Hunter's Crossing, which is the name of the community that we came together and presented and built with Stellar, hit all of the areas that you talk about. We allowed every demographic to have the ability to build a new home, to build their dream. So we had both the 55 and overs who chose to build a new home and move from the larger home so that families could move in that home and participate and grow those memories. We have the workforce housing. We have the young professionals. We have hit all the markets that you want to hit in one community. I do have to say, looking back, it was a pretty long stretch to think we could build 144 new homes in Huntingburg. We did it, and we are in Section 3 of Hunter's Crossing right now. Jago Homes is the builder from Owensboro, Kentucky, and they, again, used your market study to determine what floor plans, what housing should they introduce to the public for acceptance and ability to afford. I think one of the main criteria that helped Huntingburg was the availability of a parcel of ground that made 144 homes work on that parcel. At the same time, Huntingburg had never looked at this large of subdivision in many years and chose to be a partner with Boxer Girl and make this zoning and ordinances all fit for the housing we want to build, as well as what I quote, do it right. We did not cut corners. As you see in these pictures, we have sidewalks that people can actually walk on, meet their neighbors, front porches. We have paved streets. We have hard surface driveways. We have address blocks. When you drive in that community, to this day, you will say, wow, where did this come from? We also have looked at making it the live, work, and play lifestyle that is so prevalent and even more prevalent since March 16th. With that said, Jago has accelerated in this community with sales, as well as in this future section, we'll open up another gallery of homes that will be available that will take it to the next tier level, which would be your second or third time home buyer, which again is helping Du Bois County.
I think one of the things that we learned that Jane mentioned, that the change in how we approached housing in a subdivision this type. Like many communities, we hadn't changed any kind of our ordinances for subdivision development since the 90s. And the market had dramatically changed between then and 2014 when we launched this. And one of the things that we did was it was an education of our own decision makers on the type of home, the type of lot, the type of amenities that they would want. And it started with the Plan Commission of understanding how this property would be developed. And we drafted a new ordinance. We didn't eliminate the previous ordinances, but we drafted a new ordinance specifically for the type of development that Jane was wanting to bring to Huntingburg. And that educational process was we worked hand in hand in that education. The decision makers had to know why they were voting for these changes. And I remember, Jane, we literally put everybody on a bus. And when Jago Homes had kind of come in and said, we want to develop these properties, the type of development that was going on in DuBois County was not what was offered in Hunter's Crossing. We literally put people on a bus and we drove to Owensboro, and we spent the day walking through every size, every lot, every type of home that was potentially to be developed in Huntingburg, and gave them a bird's eye, hands-on discussion of why this type of development was important. And I think that was one of the big hurdles to getting where we were, Jane, was just having our own community, the decision makers who were going to make this happen for Jane and for others, having them on board was probably one of the biggest keys of making this successful.
Denny, you might also explain our Northside Park.
Right, and okay, so part of it was when we're building an amenity like this, one of the things in our study about Huntingburg was there was no recreational facilities north of the railroad tracks. If you know Huntingburg at all, there was no park on the north side of the community. And what was that was identified in our discussion, and as part of our development, Jane donated the land as part of the property that is being developed for a future park. And what that allowed us to do from my standpoint, how do we get infrastructure into this facility? How do we get infrastructure into the Hunter's Crossing? The location of the park was intentional because it served the area very well, but it also gave me the opportunity, the city the opportunity to build infrastructure that connected our primary access point on Chestnut Street to a new park. So as we built that infrastructure into it, partnered with Jane as the developer to build that Stellar Way, the street we built, we were full partners in the development of that first entryway into it. We shared the costs on that first idea, allowed us to use city funds to connect to a new potential park, but also gave the developer the access they needed. So there were a lot of pieces that both sides contributed along the way to make that entryway start. And Jane mentions we're in section 2 and section 3 now. The investment that she's making is all development investment in those future phases, but that partnership allowed us to make that first investment that made that an affordable effort for Jane to get her process going. So those are all things, and you look at the numbers that we have, it's remarkable. Jane, correct me if I'm wrong. I think right now we're at about 53 homes complete in the subdivision, with 12 under construction as we speak. And phase 3 is well underway. From the apartment side of the process, we worked through our Stellar program with the ICDA, and just 2 weeks ago we opened up a ribbon cutting for 56 unit apartments, workforce housing apartments near the downtown. And the Wagon Works apartments, which you're seeing on the screen now, was just opened. It's 2 blocks from 4th Street, which is our main thoroughfare. And these are apartments that are 56 units. And again, we thought differently about how we wanted to do this. The large majority of the 56 units, 52 of them are either single bedroom or efficiency apartments, with where people can live and come in, and it's directly related to that workforce that wants to start. And also, but our first occupant was someone who was downsizing, much as Jane mentioned. So this is an offering that we have now in town that just opened and is starting to see traction in the downtown, and it's part of that quality of life connects to that. When we looked at the investment in Huntingburg, we wanted to do major downtown projects, the improvement of our downtown Market Street Park and 4th Street, where our focus is. 4th Street is our main business district. And what we invested in those areas, in Market Street Park and on 4th Street, is the magnet for the folks that are looking into homes and what Jane had to do. I know that played a big part in even attracting the developer, Jane. You know, that was something the home builder said, we're willing to come to Huntingburg because you're making the investment. I think that's something we heard loud and clear, Jane.
Correct. Correct. I think the other thing that is very, very important, that we didn't cut corners in either starting with the ordinance, lot sizes, the specific homes that could be built. They are architecturally controlled, both for how many of which plan is built. Each one of them goes through an architectural acceptance approval, which keeps the neighborhood appreciating versus depreciating. We also had covenants and restrictions with a homeowners association that bills a minimal $50 a year dues, but that allows us to have the organization to mandate the architectural control going forward. Even when I turn the subdivision over after 80% of the homes are built to the neighborhood, they have the entity already in place to mandate the rules that we established that are recorded and deed restricted. I think that is a huge, huge milestone that many people had to get over. In rural communities, not some, probably most of your citizens believe no one's going to tell me what I'm going to build, what I can't have on my property when I own it. At the same time, in our covenants, there's no rentals. So we were not fighting that rental unit that someone could rent by choice in this community. All of those are owner-occupied homes.
And the price range was where we wanted to be. And that was, yeah, we had that survey that said this is the price point we had to hit. And we started at that point, and it's been consistent once those first homes were sold and people could realize you could get the quality of home that you wanted at that price point. You know, it just really took off, and I want to credit Jane and Jago for having the product, delivered the product that we talked about for all during this development phase.
I agree, Denny. It's been a professional team from day one.
One of the questions that Tina presented to me too was, how is this impacting your community? And I think you can see, number one, it is bringing new homes into Huntingburg, but there's a pride of ownership in this community that is you can feel. People, when the naysayers said before we started this, well, who in the heck's going to buy a home in an area like this? And now people are proud to say they live in Hunters Crossing, and the word is spreading, and it is bringing pride to our community. And the mayor's job, as your elected officials, is one of the things we're tasked with is growing the AV. And my gosh, 53. We've issued over $9 million in building permits in Hunters Crossing alone. So that continues to add the value, and those people are now living and working in our community. They're shopping at our stores. They're taking advantage of the amenities downtown. They're using the park that we described. We're about to get it completed. It'll be open, completed by the end of next year. A full ADA accessible, first of its kind playground in Huntingburg, a totally accessible playground that meets the needs of that community on every level. So I think there's a certain amount of pride that is coming through, not only for those living in Hunters Crossing, but for those in the community. They can see the growth, they can see the investment, and they can see that Huntingburg is moving in the right direction. And that gives the whole town momentum. To seeing this development happening is a point of pride for all of us. And it's even if you don't live there, you can see that something's happening in our community.
I think as well, Denny, the participation by the city of Huntingburg in every area, water, electric, gas, anything that you have control over. It has always been a priority in Hunter's Crossing to make it happen. And I, as a developer and speak for the builder, we did not run into those timing delays that many builders will experience building a home. We have the home built, and oh gosh, the final power isn't to it, or water. It's a fast-paced build, and at the same time, your team took on the same schedule with us. We all set the bar at the same level and have done that throughout this 4.5 years.
I know that we wanted to leave some time for questions, so I think I could talk forever about this, but we just want to leave some time for questions. So Tina, and where do we go from here?
Well, I have a question for you, immediately. You know, I could share a little bit. I mean, we talked a little bit about commuting and people that are having to commute out from outside Du Bois County because potentially of housing issues. Have you seen that you're attracting people from outside of Du Bois County, especially we hope from the South, into our region because of what you've developed there?
Yeah, I think Jane might be a little bit more in tune with the demographics in Hunter's Crossing, but I know it's a good mix. There are some folks in town that are making that move, transitioning into this housing, but we do have a number. I can know of 3 or 4 personal people that I know directly who have been working in Du Bois County for years that never had that opportunity to move here, that it just didn't make sense to move because there wasn't the housing stock that was available, that are now living in Huntingburg and working in one of our local industries. That's a reality that people are doing that. So I think that is, it rang true with all the studies. It said if you build it, they will come. It's happening. I think we're seeing that reality coming in, that those who have lived, not only are new workers coming in, but people who have worked in our county for years are now starting to think about that move to be closer to their work and have that quality of life go along with it, where that commute is cut down significantly, and we've got the things to do after work that makes it attractive.
Absolutely. So I'm curious, one of the things we've heard continually throughout the scope of the time frame of the study is that, density is an unnatural concept, right, in a lot of rural communities. And so I'm just curious how others have responded to a much more dense development within your community and more broadly within Du Bois County.
Well, again, that was that part, going back to that education. It was never done this way before, and Jane's concept of what we wanted to do here was something that we had to really sell. But I think, Jane, you've been out there. I think that once they see it, I think they're really understanding what the value of a property like this is now.
Our density is 3 to 1, three homes per acre. And we had about almost 50 acres there of property prior to selling off a little over 3 acres to the city for their overpass. But at the time, you are correct. The council and everyone said that is too small a lot. Well, what they really didn't understand is especially now, that homeowner doesn't want that responsibility and or cost to mow for 2 hours twice a week and lose that entertainment time. So again, taking the park into consideration, the covenants say we really don't want much going on in that backyard, but if they are, you're going to fence it. And we are going to have a park so swing sets aren't prevalent. Basketball goals always will be, But basketball goals, again, are already installed at the park. Can't be a Hoosier without basketball. But at the end of the day, when they actually see the layout of what we established in there, by the different setbacks, by the sidewalks, by the gallery of homes, again, that was selected to be built in there, you do not at all feel like you are living in your neighbor's bathroom. It is very, very inviting and warm with green space as to what we have done in there.
Do you see, Denny or Jane, do you see that this is impacting development in other parts of Du Bois County? I know there's a couple of other housing developments occurring. I know Ferdinand has one. I know there's some development going on in Jasper. Are y'all influencing others, I guess, so to speak?
Absolutely. I think that, it took some bold moves by our partnership to say there is a new way to do this in Du Bois County. And once this example started being seen, I think it sparked a building surge in other areas as well, that they're seeing it can be done. They're seeing the quality of home that is being built in that short time frame, that buildable home, that livable home is affordable and can be obtained in less than a year. All those types of things really hadn't been done in Du Bois County in the past, but now that model is there. Jane's leading the way, but there's others following. There's a lot more. There's a different look on development and housing in Du Bois County now than there was 6 years ago. I'm looking at I saw some of the questions on there. I think one of them was about how did our investment come about? Well, we used, as part of the Stellar program, we set aside, as part of our funding mechanism, $500,000 in TIF funds to go towards workforce development. We didn't know what that was, workforce housing of some kind. Through our relationship with Jane and with the support of our employers, how do you use TIF money? It's got to have direct impact on the employers. When we put this package together, we got support at our public hearings about using TIF dollars to create this project. A direct input from our employers, who were the ones who supplied the TIF dollars. The people who in those areas where TIF monies were being raised were the employers who said, yes, this is a development that we want to support. Our investment from the city's point was all infrastructure. And that's all assets the city wound up owning. The street that we put in, the utilities that we put in. We're fortunate that we have our own gas, water, sewer, and electric. So everything that we ran was city owned at the end of the day. So that investment that we made that allowed that first development cost to make it more affordable was Jane, are assets that we now own. We own that street. We own the utilities. We have 53 new utility customers in Huntingburg because of this. They're buying the gas, they're buying the electricity, they're using the water. They're customers of the city of Huntingburg now. So it seemed like a stretch to put $500,000 on the table with an unknown, but that's an investment I would make time and time again. But it worked because we had the support on the private side as well. The industries that were supplying the funds that created the TIF amounts were absolutely 100% in on supporting this project. And that was something we heard very straight on at the beginning, Jane.
Yeah, I think that keys off one of the questions here, is how is this impacting employers? How are employers responding? Is it helping them with workforce attraction? I know it's early, right? But, how do you respond to that question?
Well, I think it's we've heard nothing but good things from the major investors, the employers around our area that were part of the partnership at the beginning. Are very pleased. They were the ones that were given the first opportunity. They've got programs, Jane, you can talk about it, inside their own businesses that say, there's advantages to, they'll encourage you to look at Hunter's Crossing as they're making that transition. That was part of the plan.
Yeah, I think that keys off a question, Jane, about, you know, what's the price range of houses, what's the different options they have for houses, and then how about financing, right? How was this financed? How are individuals finding the financing? Just, questions a little bit about the neighborhood.
The neighborhood has over 16 floor plans. And again, you can make them a left or a right side garage. I mean, you can change up the elevation. So in theory, you have 48 homes styles in there. What we targeted with Stellar was that 1,400 square foot home, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, one car garage, to try to be under that 150 mark. We didn't hit that 150, but we were pretty close at 155 when we started back in 2016. I believe that home's around 165 now, before you add options. The options are insurmountable as to what you can add a screened-in porch, and you can add a back deck, patio, you can bump out walls. But again, all this has to be done at the time you're designing your home, not once construction is started. So these homes can range from 155, 160,000 up to almost $280,000 at this point in time. We find our median home price in there is about 201. And again, it is people that lived in Du Bois County that are downsizing and or are moving into Du Bois County because of their employment, as well as mom and dad that are moving back to be closer to the grandchildren, or people that are empty nesters now, still working, but want to get rid of that extra space and just have the new type of floor plans, which is the open concept, and enjoy the rooms that we all live in versus just having additional square footage that really isn't the usable square footage of how we live anymore. Example, a dining room. So it is truly up to that home buyer to select what home they choose to buy.
I did see one question go by that I wanted to address, and this is something that was very important about connectivity. This is a completely connected community as well. We worked with our local fiber company, Perry Spencer, here locally, and we offered them the first rights to, as we pulled electric and everything else in, we pulled conduit for fiber, so that when they come into this community, they have that fiber to the premise possibility in Hunter's Crossing. But the density that Hunter's Crossing provided also allowed them to do a total fiber build out in Huntingburg. That gave us the starting point that allowed them to make that private investment. The city of Huntingburg didn't make that investment at all. The Perry Spencer came alongside of us with the opportunity to provide density in the subdivision, made it reality to bring fiber to the premise to the whole community. And in a 3-year build out after Hunter's Crossing started, we've achieved fiber to the premise citywide. Again, without any city funds involved, a great private investment once again, but the density provided by Hunter's Crossing turned that key forward to allow that company to make an investment in our community as well. So there, the benefit that the connectivity that was affordable in that subdivision made it affordable for the entire city. And it was, another great partnership. I mean, we sat down and talked, Jane and I, with the developer, with that company, and said, boy, we want you in here. We think it would be great for our community and great for you as well. And it was a good investment all the way around.
In regards to the financing, again, we did the focus groups and called every bank that did business in Huntingburg to ask them, do you want to be a preferred lender? In regards to, we will give out the list of where you should go for your financing. And every one of them, of course, was more than willing to do that, as well as Jago had the package ready with everything specific to the home. A home buyer needs, does a lot of the work for them. And at the end of the day, it was a very quick pre-approval because Hunter's Crossing was already a pre-approved subdivision in regards to the lots, the amenities. They already had that already keyed in. All they were doing was truly checking the credit and sizing the home as far as the loan to value for that particular resident to afford on mortgage, which made it very, very streamlined.
I think you're
Hey, Denny, did you see the question about transportation, public transportation?
Yes, Huntingburg does have a public transportation system. It's on demand, basically. We have I'd like to call it the Huntingburg Uber before there was Uber. We have a van system, a transit system that is on demand. When you call City Hall and say, I need a ride, we'll come pick you up, take you to their destination. It's very expensive. It's $1.50 for the ride. So the $3 round trip, but yes, and that's something that we're very proud to offer, and it has worked very well for that's an amenity not only in James, but as the 55 and older housing, the apartment housing that we have, having a public transportation system, internally. It only runs within the city, but it makes a difference for the employers. We take regular trips to our employers. A lot of the trips we make after school, now that school's back in session, are from the school to the daycare, where that workforce family doesn't have to worry about, picking the kid up after school. We've got a way for you to get them from school to their care provider. So yeah, we do have a transit system that we're very, very proud to use and offer.
So, I think a question here asked, what's next, Denny? But I think even before what's next, I think it would be really helpful for help us think about how this might have worked for you or for another community that isn't a stellar community, right? I mean, that isn't an option for everybody. We all don't have the opportunity to wait for stellar designation. So talk a little bit about how we think about a project like this without the benefits of a stellar.
I want to be very clear. There was no stellar money in this investment. It was money that we folded into our stellar strategic investment plan that was totally city funded. So what Stellar provided for us probably at the beginning was the momentum we needed to get somebody into the plan. It was the reason that maybe Jane and I had the conversation to begin with. And it was the reason maybe that Jago talked to Jane to get that going. But I think there's, every community has an asset that they can leverage. You got to look for the asset that you can leverage. We used TIF money to do this, to make this offering. So I think, you identify where your resources are and how you need to spend them. And that, again, I'll go back to the very reason we started this conversation was data. We had enough data in our hands for me to go to our council, to go to our redevelopment commission, to go to our plan commission and say, we need to make this investment. We had the information in our hands that said we can choose to stay where we are, or we can be a little bit bold and take some risk, calculated risk, and make an investment that can change the game. And it's a calculated risk that was supported completely by the private sector, that was the eventual beneficiary of the work that we're doing. The city's benefiting from this, but like you said, it's the workforce. Our employers are benefiting from this. So it was, I guess, use your data, use your assets, and be bold a little bit. Don't be afraid to change the game a little bit if you need to. And you got to have a partner. And when Jane's been the partner, and we've had a lot of very, very honest conversations over the last 5 years. They haven't always. We've been very honest with each other from the very beginning, and the trust relationship that we had from day one has been absolutely vital. And when I wasn't doing things that I could have been doing, she would tell me. And when I needed something different from her, I would tell her, and we worked it out. And that to me is be ready to take a calculated risk, find a trusted partner, and create a path.
Jane, anything you'd add to that?
I can tell you it's not easy. I can tell you it is, when you ask why did I come to rural Du Bois County, I felt very fortunate to be asked to come down there, but at the same time, it was my pay it forward. I had, like you've said, many years of experience, and I could not compete here in the Indy market with any of those builders, developers, because of their years in business and branding. But by coming to Du Bois County, to Huntingburg, I could bring all that expertise to a smaller level, but still be able to keep that professional and big city feel of how we do business to Huntingburg. Again, it's a learning curve. Time doesn't move as quick as we'd like for it to. Many things change down the road. But again, Mayor Spinner did an excellent job in communicating. We kept the employers involved all the time. That helped them in their recruiting. We kept the public involved through meetings, focus groups as to what we were doing. There were no hidden secrets. We were open book, which again, I think is very, very important, as well as a community, a city that wanted to have a partner and figure out how we can make it happen versus just, we've never done it that way before, it can't happen. We've always found a plan B.
So some creativity.
And patience.
We do have a question here about financial incentives for the buyers. Were there any, such as sweat equity or other incentives, or anything that you did or needed to do to incent buyers?
No, we did not. The only incentives that were part of some of the employers for their employees, if they provided materials to Hunters Crossing to that home through JAGO, they participated in a compensation rebate to that employer towards their kitchen cabinets or towards lumber. Something of that perspective that actually went into that house was the only type of incentive, and that never ran through any of our records. That was all employer-employee.
The only other part of that was we partnered with Du Bois Strong, our Lido, and we did a kind of an employee assistance plan where through ICDA, their neighborhood assistance program, we received some ICDA tax credits that were purchased by, the first round was purchased by employers in Huntingburg, that we've I think had 9 or 10 loans, grants to go to help a down payment. And I think of those 9 that were countywide, it's a countywide program, but the first 5 were in Huntingburg and a part of the Hunters Crossing process. So the employee assistance plan through Du Bois Strong was kind of developed with this project in mind.
Yeah, that's fabulous. A question here. I two sides, I think, to the same question. What would you do differently next time? Then I also want to add, what did you have to do right at the beginning for all these pieces to fall into place, right?
Boy, what would you do? There's I think there's small things that I would do differently. I mean, there were things that we learned along the way that we would do differently. Some of the processes would probably be a little bit different, but the overall approach I don't want to say it was perfect, but it was the right approach. I think we had all the players at the table that needed to make the decisions, from the elected officials to the developer to private industry. We had everyone at the table making these decisions that you're always going to be, better decisions, based on your experience. But overall, it's been a very positive experience, and it's also given me confidence, I guess, and credibility to go ahead that somebody said, well, what's next? And you need to ask Jane that, what's next? I mean, we've had that discussion, what's next? But I think the experience that we've gained in these last 5.5 to 6 years are all things that are going to make us make good decisions in the future. So that I think the thing that we did right is, like as Jane mentioned, is we had, I think, everybody who needed to make decisions to make this project happen were at the table and open with each other all through the process, and that was the key to success. And that's true whatever project we're doing. So this was a great learning experience for me as a relatively new elected official when we started. And we had a good plan, and we worked the plan, but we had data to help us. We used everything that we could to bring this together.
I think one of the main criteria that has to be at the table prior to everyone having that gleam in their eyes is a willing property seller.
Absolutely.
That is in it for the long haul and understands this isn't a windfall on how much money you can sell your farmland for, because these deals will not work at inflated land prices. So that is really, really key, because this doesn't happen overnight, nor can you spread that land price throughout with development prices, development cost of land to make the deal work. And that's hard to identify willing property sellers.
Yes, and I know as part of the housing study, we potential areas for development. But once again, we didn't go out to talk to see if people were willing. And so we know that that's a challenge and something that we need to talk about as part of this series. Denny, a couple of things just quickly. We talk a little bit about the filter effect, right? So the idea that in so many of our communities, because we have a lack of variety and a lack of housing, you find people staying longer in houses than they need to, and then, not creating the opportunity for a young family to move up, or not, creating the opportunity for someone to move out of their home and filtering that, through the life cycle, right? So I know you have the example in the article that was in the paper about the woman who sold her house and moved into into the wagon wheel project. But I'm curious if you're beginning to see some impacts of sort of that filtering effect, making houses available for others. And how long-term do you expect this development to really impact what we know is a huge challenge in our region, and that's, property values. So just curious how you would respond to those two questions.
Well, what the article you referred to is our first occupant of the Wagon Works apartments was a lady who was now living by her in her home in the near downtown by herself. Her husband had passed, and she wanted to stay downtown, and so she was able to move into the Wagon Works apartment. She had a single bedroom. She walks to church every day, but that move made that property, which was an attractive property in itself in our downtown, available to the next buyer. And I think we're seeing that a lot. The stock that was there, while some had some age on it, was still good stock. There were still good homes in the community. They just weren't available. The numbers that you saw in the study showed that, and so these moves are making that stock available. If you're as people are making these moves, these transitions, I think it's pretty easy to see that a well-priced home, even if it's an older home, does not have any property any problem selling. If you're priced right and you're available, that property is going to go very, very quickly. So I think we're seeing that effect happening. And I forget what your second question was, Tina.
Oh, just long term, how it begins impacting property values in your community.
Well, it is affecting our property values in our community in a very positive way. I know we just went through probably one of the toughest budget times in my term, certainly, but maybe in city history, with the COVID downturn, the uncertainty of revenues, the uncertainty of what that tax base is going to be, and trying to hold the line on expenses and still provide the services that cities need to provide. But when you see that AV report come in year after year for the last 4 years, we've seen a constant growth in our AV, which allows us to hold the tax rate where we are, keep a balanced budget, and still provide the services we have and maintain the tax rate. And so that AV is that piece of the puzzle that really, the unforeseen to a lot of people, but me sitting at this desk and looking at these financials as we look at the budget, to be able to say we can have a balanced budget, we can keep our spending at kind of current levels, because that AV is going to support that number and not have an additional tax burden on the city, on our residents. So it's the proof is in the numbers, and the AV numbers are growing, and they have for the last 5 years, and a lot of it has to do with the investment at Hunters Crossing.
Thank you, Denny. I've got to unmute myself.
Yeah.
We have a couple of other questions that have come through. One about replacing dilapidated housing and infill housing as it relates to vacant lots. And I just want to respond, and probably you've heard already that will be the topic of our next session in this webinar series. And so that's a topic that we really do need to address. And then a question about whether anybody had experience addressing sort of the potential conflict between between covenants and code in a community relative to density. And I can say that is a topic that is unique in some communities, that certainly Lisa's been actually exploring a little bit with the speaker we're hoping to bring in for our August 13th meeting. And actually it's addressed in a book by this particular speaker. And so Lisa, you might reach out and provide the name of that book. I don't have it, but yeah, we are trying to really address the range of challenges that we face relative to housing. And so that seems a great segue to number one, say thank you to Jane and to Denny for jumping on board for this very first session in our series. We couldn't think of a better way to begin this conversation than to talking to the two of you, right? The work that you have done just really embodies what we've learned from the study, but also who we are, right, as people in this region, right? And that we, working together and partnering, we can find ways to address some of these challenges. And these challenges do create great opportunity for us as a region. And one of the things that I'm hearing is that housing, we are not seeing that housing demand is being impacted by COVID-19. To the contrary, we're hearing that housing is becoming equally more important. And so I really appreciate this discussion today. I invite you to join us next on September 16th for the next session, which is about medium density and infill housing. We're going to highlight communities that are really taking advantage of vacant lots and redevelopment opportunities close to community centers. an important conversation and a good one, especially in rural communities. And so I hope you'll join us. Denny, Jane, any parting comments that you have for us as we sign off today?
Jane, I'll let you go first.
I have to tell you, thank you very much for the study that you have updated. And again, that is the Bible for developers to go forward, both in their overall concept, as well as for the financial compatibility of what we say they need versus your report reinforces it. So thank you for all the blood, sweat, and tears that go into making those reports truly valid.
And I would say that as great of an idea as this was in 2014 to do this project, with the last 6 months that we've lived through, this investment is even more important, because I think communities that there's people looking, you know, we've proven that you can work anywhere, and you can live where you want to live. And making this investment in Huntingburg was a good idea from the very beginning, but it's even more of a good idea today, because if those who are looking to change their lifestyle and be in a rural community and look for a place to live, having these options is something that we can really promote. And I think every rural community in our region has a reason why people live in their community. Find out what that is, promote it, exploit it, stand on your stage and yell it, but have a reason for people to come and invest in your community. And if you don't invest in yourself, then others won't invest either. So while times are tough, the time to invest in yourself may be this time.
Thank you, Denny. Great words. I mean, we have to own our destiny, right?
Right.
So thank you for that. Just a final couple of things. Number one, you should have seen in chat that we provided the link to the housing study. It's on the regionalopportunityinc.org website. We provided a link to Jane's website. A big thank you to both Denny and Jane. I know many people have called and talked to you guys, and you've provided countless hours of advice to folks, and I'm sure that won't stop now. So thank you for being available and open to all of us. Those of you who know me know this never happens, but we're going to finish 4 minutes early. And so I'm giving you back 3 or 4 minutes of your day. But thanks to everybody for your participation and for being so interested in advancing the Indiana Uplands. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.